The cold, metallic corridors of the Galactic Empire's warship echoed with the sound of footsteps as Sergeant Mark Drayton walked alongside his team. They had just completed a mission on a distant planet and were on their way back to their station. Mark was a seasoned soldier, used to the Empire's harsh ways and cold commands. But today, something felt different. He was called into the command center, a sterile room filled with blinking screens and grizzled officers. As he entered, the commanding officer, Captain Terrace, turned to face him. His sharp eyes studied Mark for a moment. Then he handed him a datapad. "Sergeant, you've been reassigned," Captain Terrace said in his usual gruff tone. "You'll be escorting the new Imperial leader to the station. She's important, so don't fail your mission." Mark raised an eyebrow. "A new leader? We're on the edge of the galaxy, Captain. Who could possibly be that important?" Terrace didn't answer, only pointed to the datapad. Mark's fingers scrolled over the details, but his mind was already wandering. It was strange to have a new leader, especially so far from the heart of the Empire. It was always rare for someone to rise in power here, and when they did, it was usually through bloodshed, manipulation, or sheer ruthlessness. "Is she from a prominent family?" Mark asked. "Not exactly," the captain replied. "But she's been handpicked by the highest authorities. Just do your job, Sergeant." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The highest authorities, the ones who made decisions from their grand palace on the Imperial homeworld. He had only heard whispers about the secrets that lay within their halls. But this mission was different. There was a sense of urgency that he couldn't shake. Something was off. Later, as they boarded a transport ship, Mark's thoughts swirled. He was assigned to escort this mysterious leader, but the more he thought about it, the more questions rose in his mind. Why had she been selected? Why had she been sent to such a remote station? And perhaps most importantly, why was she so important that he was being pulled from his usual duties to escort her personally? The transport ship rumbled as it made its way toward the space station. Mark stood by a viewport, gazing out into the endless black void of space. A part of him felt excited. New missions always had their thrill. But another part felt uneasy. He had been a soldier for too long not to sense when something didn't add up. The ship landed, and Mark and his team were led down the ramp to awaiting transport. Standing at the foot of the ramp was a figure who, at first, seemed out of place. She was small, barely reaching Mark's chest. Her figure was slight, but her presence was undeniable. She wore the standard Imperial uniform, but something about her seemed different. She was like a tiny flame in the cold, dark expanse of space. Her eyes met Mark's with a sharp, calculating gaze. It was clear that she wasn't just anyone. She was someone who held authority, and everyone around her could feel it. The tension in the air was palpable. "This is your new leader, Sergeant," a nearby officer said with a salute. "Her name is Lady Varela." Mark nodded, though he was too stunned to speak. Lady Varela. He had never heard of her before, and yet here she was, with all the gravitas of someone far more important than he could imagine. Mark wasn't sure whether to kneel, salute, or simply wait for orders. He had never been in the presence of someone so small but so imposing. "Sergeant Drayton." Lady Varela's voice was soft, but it held an edge of authority that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "I trust you will serve me well." Mark swallowed hard, feeling suddenly like a rookie all over again. "Of course, ma'am. Whatever you need." Without another word, she turned and started walking toward the transport. Mark followed her, trying to keep his questions to himself. The team had been briefed, but no one had said a word about the nature of their new leader's authority. No one had said why someone so small, so young, could command such a presence. As they traveled through the station, Mark couldn't help but notice how everyone around her treated her. It was as if she were the Emperor herself, commanding respect simply by walking into a room. Crew members snapped to attention, heads bowed, eyes averted. But it wasn't just the uniform that made them obey. It was the way she carried herself, as though she had seen and survived things no one else could understand. Mark could feel the questions piling up inside him. What was she really here for? What power did she possess? And how had she risen so quickly in the ranks of the Empire? The answer, he was certain, was something no one had told him. And that made his nerves burn with both fear and curiosity. As they arrived at her quarters, she turned to face Mark. Her small frame almost made her look like a child standing there, but her expression was anything but innocent. Her eyes bored into him, and he felt a weight pressing down on his chest. "I will be your boss now, Sergeant. Remember that," she said softly, "and don't mistake my size for weakness." Mark blinked, uncertain of how to respond. Before he could say anything, she walked past him and into her room, leaving him to process the overwhelming situation. He wasn't sure what to think yet, but one thing was clear. This was going to be the start of something far more dangerous and powerful than he had ever imagined. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, watching as Lady Varela disappeared into her quarters. His heart raced, and the questions that had been swirling in his mind only grew louder. There was something about her, something that felt both intimidating and magnetic. It was more than her small stature. It was the way she carried herself, the way the room seemed to shift when she walked in. As if everyone in her presence knew she was no ordinary leader. "Focus, Drayton," Mark muttered to himself, snapping out of his daze. He turned away from the door and started to leave, but before he could take a step, a voice echoed through the corridor. "Sergeant Drayton," came a cold, commanding tone. He spun around quickly to see Lady Varela standing in the doorway of her quarters. She wasn't facing him directly, but he could feel her eyes on him, piercing through the darkness like twin beams of light. Mark straightened himself, unsure of what she wanted, but already feeling a sense of discomfort. "Yes, Mom." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward him, each step measured, as if she were savoring the tension she created. Mark stood perfectly still, but inside, his mind raced. He had never felt this way before, not even in the most dangerous combat situations. There was something unnatural about the way she controlled the room, as though she commanded not just the Empire, but the very space around her. When she stopped in front of him, there was a long, pregnant pause. For a moment, Mark felt as though the world itself had held its breath. Then she spoke again, her voice soft yet filled with a quiet authority. "You're wondering why I'm here, aren't you?" she asked, almost as if reading his thoughts. Mark hesitated for a second, then nodded. He wasn't sure if it was appropriate to speak, but the question weighed heavily on his mind. "Yes, ma'am. With all due respect, I've never heard of you before. I've been with the Empire for a long time, and I've never seen anyone like you." Her lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You will," she said cryptically. "You'll see exactly why I'm here, Sergeant, and you will learn to respect that." Before he could respond, there was a loud crash in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of blaster fire. The station seemed to tremble beneath their feet, and the quiet, eerie calm that had surrounded them shattered like glass. Without a word, Lady Varela turned and began walking toward the commotion. Mark, instinctively, followed her, his training kicking in. His hand went to the blaster at his hip, but it wasn't fear for himself that filled him. It was a strange sense of urgency, like the entire universe was about to change, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. They reached the control center in moments, where a group of Imperial officers was huddled together, shouting commands into their communicators. Mark didn't need to ask what was happening. He could already see the flashing red lights, the alerts blaring across the screens. The station was under attack. One of the officers, a young lieutenant, spotted Lady Varela and rushed over to her. His face was pale, his voice shaky as he spoke. "Lady Varela, the rebels have breached our outer defenses. We need to evacuate." She didn't flinch at his words. In fact, her expression remained perfectly calm, almost detached. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "I don't think you understand, Lieutenant," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "I'm not evacuating. You will stay and fight. All of you will." The lieutenant stared at her in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't process her command. "But, ma'am, they're heavily armed. We're outnumbered." "I don't care," she interrupted, her tone sharp and unwavering. "You'll do as I say." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she said them. There was no hesitation, no room for argument. The lieutenant, realizing the futility of his protests, stiffened and nodded, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Lady Varela turned to Mark. "You'll follow my lead, Sergeant. No one else here can handle this situation. It's mine now." For the first time, Mark felt a small spark of doubt. Could she really handle this? Was she capable of leading them through something like this? She was small, too small to command a station of this size. But then again, there was something in her presence that made him want to believe her. It was more than just authority. It was a sense of inevitability, as though she had already won before the battle even began. The rebel forces began to push forward, and Mark snapped back into action. He followed Lady Varela into the heart of the battle, where blaster fire lit up the dark hallways. Soldiers scrambled to take positions, but Lady Varela walked calmly through the chaos, as if she had seen battles like this 1,000 times before. Mark followed her lead, doing his best to protect her, but every time he glanced over, she seemed to be in control of the situation. She gave orders in a voice that cut through the noise, and the soldiers obeyed without question. Her strategic mind was already at work, outthinking the rebels at every turn. It wasn't until they reached the control room that Mark truly understood the scope of her power. Lady Varela stood in front of a large display screen, her hands moving across the controls with ease. In mere moments, the station's defense systems came online, turning the tide of the battle. The rebels, caught off guard, were forced to retreat. When it was over, and the station's halls were quiet once again, Mark stood in awe. Lady Varela hadn't just led them through the attack. She had turned what seemed like certain defeat into a crushing victory. "Impressive," Mark whispered, though the words barely seemed enough to capture the scale of what had just happened. She turned to him, her eyes glowing with something Mark couldn't quite place. "You haven't seen anything yet." The days following the attack were a blur for Sergeant Mark Drayton. Lady Varela's leadership had shaken the station into a new kind of order, one that was both unnerving and awe-inspiring. She was everywhere, her presence felt in every corner, every operation, every strategic decision. As she moved through the station, the air seemed to ripple with her authority. The soldiers, once wary and unsure, now followed her commands without hesitation. But there was a growing sense of something deeper, something darker beneath the surface. Mark spent most of his days at her side, watching as she orchestrated everything with a calculated precision that was beyond anything he had ever seen. No one ever questioned her orders, even when they were extreme. And that, in itself, was the most troubling part. One evening, after another round of military drills, Mark found himself alone in a small briefing room, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't shake. The door to the room slid open, and Lady Varela entered without a sound. She didn't even glance at him, her eyes focused on a datapad in her hand as she walked across the room. "You're still here, Sergeant?" she asked, her voice smooth but sharp, as though she hadn't expected him to linger. Mark stood up, his posture stiff as he turned to face her. "Just thinking, ma'am, about everything that's been happening lately." She raised an eyebrow, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I see. And what is it you're thinking about, Drayton?" He hesitated, then spoke cautiously. "How did you manage to do all of this? The way you turned the tide of the battle. It's almost like you knew exactly what was going to happen. Every move you made. It was like you had some kind of plan before the rebels even showed up." Lady Varela's eyes flicked up to meet his, her gaze as steady and unblinking as ever. For a moment, Mark thought he saw something in those eyes, a flicker of something ancient, something that didn't belong to someone so young. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same cold intensity that had defined her from the beginning. "Knowledge is power, Sergeant," she replied, her voice low and controlled. "The key to victory is understanding the enemy before they even know you exist. I didn't just plan for the battle. You should know that by now. I planned for everything." Mark couldn't help but feel the pull of her presence, the magnetic force that drew him closer to her, whether he wanted to or not. There were times when he found himself standing at her side, watching her move across the station, watching her command others with the same quiet authority. And in those moments, a part of him couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have that kind of power. Power that transcended everything. Power that bent the universe itself to her will. But with that power came a price. Mark was beginning to realize that the Empire wasn't the only thing Lady Varela sought to control. It was the entire galaxy. He was pulled from his thoughts one evening when he was summoned to her quarters. This time, it wasn't for a briefing or a discussion of tactics. No, this time, it felt different. There was something in the air, something that told him this meeting would be unlike any other. His stomach twisted with nerves as he made his way down the long corridors toward her private chambers. When he arrived, the door slid open without a sound, and Lady Varela stood at the center of the room, her back to him. She was staring out the viewport, her small figure silhouetted against the vast expanse of stars. The room itself was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, and for a moment, Mark was struck by how calm she seemed, how serene, as though she were untouched by the chaos that raged outside the station's walls. "Sergeant," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. Mark snapped to attention. "Yes, Mom." She didn't turn to face him, her eyes still fixed on the stars outside. "Come here. I want you to see something." Mark approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't quite place the feeling, but something about her demeanor unsettled him. There was a quiet intensity in the way she held herself, a silent invitation to witness something he wasn't sure he was ready to see. As he stepped up beside her, she finally looked at him, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mark followed her gaze, his eyes scanning the stars beyond the viewport. The distant lights of planets and moons flickered in the blackness of space, but they seemed so far away, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He could feel her waiting for his answer. And yet, no words seemed right. "I see endless space," he said cautiously. "I see the galaxy. But what does that mean, ma'am?" Lady Varela's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "It means everything, Sergeant. You see, the galaxy is not just a place. It's a battlefield, a stage for power to rise, and for those with the strength to seize it to rule. What you see before you is a canvas, waiting to be painted in blood and glory." Mark swallowed hard. There was something about the way she spoke, the intensity in her voice, that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It wasn't just power she was after, it was domination. She wasn't interested in merely leading the Empire. She wanted the entire galaxy, every corner of it, under her control. "I didn't bring you here just to talk about tactics, Sergeant," Lady Varela continued, her voice dropping to a low, almost dangerous tone. "I brought you here because you are the first person who has truly seen what I am capable of. You understand the power I wield, even if you don't fully understand how it works." Mark didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to deny it, to tell her that he was just a soldier, a cog in the machine. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. He had seen the way she commanded respect from everyone around her. He had felt the pulse of her power, the way she made the impossible seem inevitable. "From now on," she said, turning to face him fully, "I will need someone I can trust. Someone who understands the magnitude of what I'm about to do." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "What are you going to do, ma'am?" Her smile widened, and for the first time, it seemed almost predatory. "I'm going to break the chains that bind this galaxy, Sergeant. The Empire is a broken system, a puppet show led by weak, complacent fools. It needs to be remade, reshaped by my hand. Mark couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. There was something in her tone that sent a message he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. It was as if she were not just the leader of the station, but the very heartbeat of the Empire itself, dictating its future with every word she spoke. "You're right," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there's more to this than just tactics and strategy. There's power, a power that few understand, but which I intend to control." Mark frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean? I've never seen anything like what you did out there. You don't just lead with strategy. You're different." Lady Varela finally looked up at him, her gaze piercing through him. "I told you before, Drayton. I am not like the others. I carry within me the legacy of an ancient civilization, one that ruled this galaxy long before the Empire even existed. My power isn't just in my mind. It's in my blood." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had heard whispers about the old empires, legends of long-lost civilizations that had once held dominion over the stars, but he had never believed them. Now, staring into Lady Varela's eyes, he wasn't so sure anymore. "You're saying you're from one of those ancient civilizations?" Mark asked, his voice trembling slightly. She nodded slowly, her lips curling into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Yes, I am the heir to a forgotten throne, one that was taken from my people, and now I will take it back. Every step I take, every move I make, brings me closer to my true purpose." Mark's mind raced. The idea seemed impossible. The Empire, for all its vastness, was built on the idea that it controlled everything, that no force could challenge its supremacy. Yet here stood Lady Varela, a small woman with an unshakable conviction and a power that defied explanation. "You don't understand, Sergeant," she said, as though reading his thoughts. "The Empire is only a stepping stone. It's nothing compared to the force I can bring. I was born to rule, born to reshape this galaxy in my image." Mark struggled to comprehend the enormity of her words. But why the Empire? Why not just take control of everything now? Lady Varela's smile vanished, replaced by an icy look that seemed to pierce through him. "Because, Drayton, the Empire is just a tool, a means to an end. Once I've secured my place here, once I've shown them all what I am capable of, the real work begins. The Empire is a broken system, but it will serve me for a time." Mark didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to argue, to tell her that the Empire was more than just a means to an end, that it was something people fought for, something real. But another part of him couldn't deny the raw power she exuded, the way she commanded the room, the way she bent the very atmosphere around her to her will. "Are you afraid of me, Sergeant?" Lady Varela asked, her voice a soft caress, yet it sent a shiver through him. Mark swallowed hard. "No, ma'am. But I don't fully understand you. What do you want from all of this?" Her eyes narrowed, her smile returning, though it was cold and unsettling. "What I want is simple. The galaxy at my feet, and anyone who stands in my way will learn just how powerful I truly am." Mark felt a surge of fear, but also an unshakable sense of something else, something dark and dangerous. He realized, with a start, that Lady Varela wasn't just a leader. She was a force of nature, and the galaxy would soon have no choice but to bend to her will. And yet, despite the fear crawling up his spine, Mark couldn't bring himself to turn away. There was something about her, something undeniable, something he couldn't resist. He wasn't just witnessing history, he was part of it now. And whether he liked it or not, his fate was now intertwined with hers. The tension aboard the station continued to mount in the days that followed. Mark Drayton could feel it in the air, a thick, oppressive presence that seemed to hover over everyone, but no one dared to speak of it. Lady Varela's influence had grown, and with it, the sense that something far larger was unfolding before their eyes. The station was no longer just a military outpost. It had become a stronghold, a place where her presence alone seemed to ensure the Empire's dominance in the sector. Mark found himself in a constant state of unease. It wasn't just the missions or the training drills anymore. It was the way she operated, the subtle control she exerted over every detail. Her every word was law, her every glance a command. And the strangest part was how the others responded to her. It wasn't out of respect alone. It was fear, but also something else. A strange kind of admiration, even awe. The soldiers followed her orders without question, and the officers spoke to her as though she were their equal, despite her youth and small stature. Mark took a step back, his mind racing. He had heard whispers of rebellion within the Empire, of factions that sought to overthrow the current regime. But he had never imagined that Lady Varela, with her quiet strength and unnatural presence, would be the one to lead it. This wasn't just about power. It was about something far greater. An empire built on her terms, not theirs. "You will help me, Sergeant," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You will help me rebuild this galaxy from the ground up. And when I am finished, there will be no one left to challenge me." Mark didn't answer immediately. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was just a soldier. He had never asked for any of this, never sought to be part of something so vast, so dangerous. But the more he stood in her presence, the more he realized that resistance might be futile. She was already shaping the galaxy with every decision, every action. Lady Varela's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity never left her eyes. "I can see it in you, Drayton. You are loyal. You understand that the Empire is only the beginning of something much, much bigger." Mark nodded slowly, though his mind was still reeling from her words. What had he gotten himself into? Could he really follow someone like her? Someone so consumed by power, so unrelenting in her quest for domination. But even as the doubts crept into his mind, he couldn't shake the pull she had on him. He was already too far gone, already a part of her plans, whether he liked it or not. "Yes, Mum," he finally said, his voice steady, though the turmoil inside him raged on. "I'll follow your orders." Lady Varela's smile returned, this time warmer, though it held a touch of something darker. "Good, because the real work begins now." The weeks that followed marked a transformation aboard the station. Lady Varela's grip tightened around everything, every operation, every officer, every soldier. It was as if she were weaving an invisible web of control, one strand at a time, pulling the station, and perhaps even the entire galaxy, into her grasp. Mark Drayton could feel it. He could feel the pull of her will, like gravity itself, bending everything around her to her designs. He had never known such absolute certainty in anyone, not even in the highest-ranking officers of the Empire. Every day, Lady Varela commanded more and more of the station's resources. Strategic meetings were held in private chambers, far away from prying eyes. Soldiers trained harder, longer. The atmosphere grew more intense, charged with an unspoken anticipation, like the calm before a storm. And as Mark became more involved with her plans, he realized something. She wasn't just preparing for the next battle. She was preparing for the galaxy itself. It was during one of those long, tense meetings that Mark began to understand the depth of what Lady Varela intended. He stood at her side, listening as she discussed the Empire's weaknesses, its fractured leadership, its complacency. There was no doubt in her voice, no second-guessing of her intentions. She spoke with the authority of someone who had already won, who was simply waiting for the pieces to fall into place. "General Aslan and his forces are spread too thin," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "We can exploit that. Their supply lines are vulnerable. A strike on their command center would cause irreparable damage. And once we have control of the central hub, we can cripple the entire sector." Mark nodded, taking mental notes. As much as he admired her brilliance, the sheer scale of her plans left him unsettled. He had been part of countless missions in the Empire, but none of them had ever felt so monumental. She wasn't just strategizing. She was orchestrating a revolution, one that could reshape the entire galaxy. "Ma'am," Mark spoke up, unable to hide the uncertainty in his voice, "won't the Empire retaliate? We're talking about attacking one of their strongest sectors." Lady Varela turned her piercing gaze to him. "That's the beauty of it, Sergeant," she said with a thin smile. "They won't know it's coming. By the time they realize what we've done, it will be too late. The Empire is no longer the monolith it once was. Its foundations are crumbling. I am the one who will rebuild it, not from the ground up, but from its very core." Mark felt a cold chill run down his spine as he processed her words. The Empire wasn't just a target, it was a stepping stone, a broken tool that Lady Varela intended to remake in her image. And that meant the very nature of the galaxy itself was about to change. Later that night, Mark found himself alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars. The weight of everything she had said hung in the air, suffocating him. He had always followed orders, always done what was expected of him. But now, with every mission, with every conversation, he could feel the lines between right and wrong becoming blurred. He had pledged his loyalty to the Empire. But Lady Varela, she was something else entirely. There was an undeniable power in her, a force that drew him in, a part of him even wanting to follow her, to see her vision realized. Yet another part of him, the part that still clung to the values of the Empire, knew that what she sought wasn't just a change of leadership. She wanted complete domination. She wanted to reshape the galaxy in her image, and that would mean erasing everything that had come before her. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime at the door. Before he could respond, it slid open, revealing Lady Varela herself. Her small frame filled the doorway, her presence overwhelming the room. She didn't need to speak for Mark to know that something was happening, something significant. "I need you," she said simply, her voice holding an edge of authority that left no room for argument. "Get ready. The time has come to take the first step." Mark's heart skipped a beat as he nodded, instantly rising to his feet. "Yes, Mom." As they walked together through the dimly lit corridors, Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just another mission. It was the beginning of something far greater, something that would echo across the galaxy for years to come. Lady Varela's plan was already in motion, and there would be no turning back. They arrived at the war room, a heavily secured chamber deep within the station. Inside, a map of the galaxy was displayed on a large holoscreen, showing the positions of various Imperial forces, the key sectors under control, and of course, the areas that were most vulnerable. The officers present stiffened when Lady Varela entered, but they said nothing. They knew better than to question her. Mark stood at her side as she made her way to the central console, her fingers flying over the holographic controls with ease. The officers watched her, silent but attentive, as she outlined her next move. "The first target is General Aislin's command center," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "We will strike swiftly, before they have time to react. Once we have control of the hub, we will send a message to the rest of the Empire. They will know that I am here, and that I will not be denied." Mark could see the resolve in her eyes. This wasn't just a battle for control. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. Every move she made was calculated, precise, and deadly. And for the first time since meeting her, Mark understood just how deep her ambition ran. It wasn't enough for her to be a leader within the Empire. She wanted to be the Empire. She wanted to be the ruler of everything. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered. "We leave within the hour." Mark nodded, his heart pounding as he followed the others to the docking bay. As they made their way to the ships, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead. This was no longer just about following orders. This was about choosing sides, about deciding whether he would be a part of this new galaxy that Lady Varela was bent on creating, or whether he would stand against it. The fleet assembled, sleek and powerful ships, lined up in perfect formation. Lady Varela stood at the center, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the stars. Mark looked at her, his mind racing. There was no turning back now. The future of the galaxy was in her hands, and with each passing moment, he was drawn deeper into her plans. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. The attack on General Aislin's command center was swift, almost surgical in its execution. As soon as Lady Varela had given the order, the fleet moved out, cutting through space with the precision of a razor blade. Mark Drayton found himself at the center of the operation, following the orders of a woman whose influence now seemed to stretch beyond the stars themselves. It felt different this time. The air aboard the fleet's command ship was thick with anticipation. The officers worked feverishly at their stations, glancing toward Lady Varela as she stood at the front of the room, her eyes locked onto the holographic display of the target. She was a study in calm, her small stature belying the immense power she wielded. Mark couldn't help but watch her, captivated by the ease with which she directed everything around her, as if she were born for this. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just absolute control. The station's defenses were formidable, but Lady Varela had anticipated every possible countermeasure. As the fleet approached Aislin's stronghold, the first wave of fighters shot out, a dazzling display of precision as they tore through the station's outer defenses. Mark watched as their coordinated assault overwhelmed the enemy's forces, and in just minutes, the first line of defense was shattered. "Prepare to deploy the ground units," Lady Varela ordered, her voice as cool and unyielding as ever. Mark's pulse quickened. The ground assault would be the decisive part of the operation. They had to breach the station's core, infiltrate the heart of the command center, and eliminate Aislin's officers before they had time to react. Lady Varela was already thinking 2 steps ahead, already planning her next move. As the transport ships descended toward the surface, Mark felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. His team, a specially selected group of elite soldiers, was ready for whatever came next. They landed with a jolt, and the doors of the ship slid open to reveal the sprawling corridors of the command station. It was a maze of metal and machinery, each turn potentially hiding an enemy soldier, an ambush or worse. "Stick to the plan," Mark muttered to his team, his voice barely above a whisper. "We hit them hard, fast, and take control." They moved as one, their footsteps silent on the cold metal floor. Mark's heart raced as they pushed forward, each moment building the tension in his chest. They encountered minimal resistance at first, the enemy scattered by the fleet's overwhelming firepower. It wasn't until they reached the inner sanctum of the command center that the true danger revealed itself. A squad of elite soldiers from Aislin's personal guard stood at the entrance, their weapons raised and ready. The standoff was brief. Mark's team, trained for such moments, responded with swift, deadly efficiency. Blasters fired, and the guards were cut down before they had time to react. Mark's breath came in sharp gasps as he moved through the bodies, his mind focused entirely on the mission at hand. There was no room for mercy, no room for hesitation. The target was clear. Inside the command center, chaos reigned. The high-ranking officers of General Aislinn were scrambling, trying to make sense of the sudden attack, but it was too late. Lady Varela's forces had already infiltrated the station, and there was no way to prevent the inevitable. Mark stood in the midst of the madness, his pulse pounding in his ears. He was there for one reason: to ensure that Aislin's power was severed. The command center fell silent as Lady Varela herself entered, her small figure cutting through the room like a shadow. Every officer turned to her in shock, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. "General Aislinn is dead," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "And now I control this station. You will answer to me, or you will be discarded." There was no question in her words, no doubt in her tone. The officers looked at each other, then slowly, one by one, they dropped to their knees, pledging their loyalty to her. It was a display of submission, but it was also a reminder of her power, a reminder that anyone who stood against her would fall. Mark couldn't tear his eyes away from her. There was no fear in her stance, no hesitation in her eyes. Lady Varela had become something more than just a leader. She was an unstoppable force, a living embodiment of the new order she was creating. As the officers swore their allegiance, Mark felt a strange pang in his chest. He had been part of the Empire, part of something that stood for order, for structure. But Lady Varela was rewriting those rules, casting aside everything he had known. And yet, as much as he wanted to resist, as much as his training told him to question her methods, there was something magnetic about her power, something that made him wonder if maybe the Empire needed to fall, if maybe she was the one who could bring true change to the galaxy. "Are we done here, Sergeant?" Lady Varela's voice broke through his thoughts, and he snapped to attention. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady but his mind still swirling with uncertainty. She nodded, her eyes gleaming with something dangerous, something that spoke of even greater things to come. "We've only just begun." The realization hit Mark like a physical blow. What they had just done, what Lady Varela had just done, was not a small victory. It wasn't just the capture of a station or the elimination of a single threat. This was the first of many steps toward her ultimate goal, complete domination. She wasn't content with merely reshaping the Empire. She intended to reshape the entire galaxy, to make it bend to her will. The fleet remained in position, but Mark could sense the shift in the air, the way everything now felt different. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was the beginning of a new era, one that would forever change the fabric of the galaxy. Later that night, Mark stood alone in his quarters, staring out into the abyss of space. His thoughts churned, swirling with the weight of everything that had happened. Lady Varela's power was undeniable, her vision unyielding. He had followed her orders, had helped her secure the station, and now he was a part of something that was much larger than himself. Could he continue to follow her? Could he ignore the growing unease in his gut, the sense that this path would lead to something far darker than he could imagine? As the stars flickered before him, Mark knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. He was in this, whether he liked it or not. The galaxy was changing, and whether he stood with Lady Varela or against her, the consequences would be far-reaching. The question wasn't what she would do. It was what he was willing to become. Mark Drayton's life had been irrevocably changed in the days following the attack on General Aislin's command center. He had always known the harsh realities of war, had always followed orders with unwavering loyalty. But now, under Lady Varela's rule, it was as if the very fabric of the universe itself had been altered. The galaxy he had once known was now a place where power reigned supreme, where loyalty was demanded, and where resistance meant certain destruction. The stations, once bastions of Empire strength, were now under Lady Varela's command. They weren't just military outposts anymore. They were symbols of a new order. With each victory, with each world they conquered, her grip on the galaxy tightened. Mark found himself becoming more deeply entangled in her plans, even as the conflict inside him continued to grow. He had pledged his loyalty to the Empire, but it was becoming harder and harder to reconcile his past with the present reality that Lady Varela was shaping. Lady Varela had not been idle since the conquest of Aislin's stronghold. She had swiftly consolidated her power, moving against other factions within the Empire that posed a threat to her rise. One by one, the high-ranking officers who had once held sway over entire sectors were either captured, eliminated, or brought into her fold. The galaxy was beginning to recognize her as the new power, the new ruler. Mark had become something of a personal advisor to her, though he would never have called it that. She used him as a trusted lieutenant, one who could carry out her orders with military precision, and perhaps more importantly, with loyalty. It was in this role that Mark found himself standing in a darkened war room, the holographic map of the galaxy spread before them. The stars and planets blinked on the screen like a galaxy-wide game of chess, with Lady Varela orchestrating every move. "We are poised for the next phase," she said, her voice low and commanding, as she stood beside the projection. Her eyes gleamed with a purpose that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "The Empire is divided, but it is still strong. We need to strike now, before they can regroup. This is the moment when we can truly change the course of the galaxy." Mark stood by her side, watching as she manipulated the map, placing markers and highlighting key targets. His mind raced. He had seen what she could do when she set her mind to it, had watched as she tore down the remnants of the Empire's old leadership. But now, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about gaining power anymore. This was about reshaping the very foundations of the galaxy. "What's the plan?" Mark asked, unable to keep the question out of his voice. Lady Varela turned to him, her eyes narrowing as she looked him over. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing his worth in her mind, before responding. "We go after the heart of the Empire," she said softly, her lips curling into a smile that was both predatory and confident. "We strike at the Imperial throne world itself." Mark's breath caught in his chest. The throne world. It was the center of the Empire's power, the beating heart of the entire galactic order. If they succeeded in taking it, there would be no turning back. The entire galaxy would fall into Lady Varela's hands. "You want to take the throne?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't just want it," she replied, her voice hardening with determination. "I will have it. And once I do, the galaxy will be mine to rule. No more divisions. No more petty squabbles. The galaxy will know only one ruler." Mark stood in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him. There was no denying her vision, no question that she had the power, the will, and the ruthlessness to achieve it. And yet, as much as he had followed her every step, there was a part of him that recoiled at the thought of what was to come. The Empire might have been flawed, but it had been the structure he had known for his entire life. It had been a force for order, for stability, even if that order was brutal and unforgiving. But now, the very concept of the Empire was being dismantled, replaced with something darker, something more dangerous. Lady Varela wasn't content to rule as a mere sovereign. She wanted absolute power. She wanted to shape the galaxy in her image. And in doing so, she would erase everything that had come before her. Her gaze snapped back to the map, and Mark could see the fire burning in her eyes. This wasn't just about power. It was about control, about reshaping the universe itself. He had to admit, as much as he feared what she was becoming, there was something compelling about her vision. A part of him, buried deep inside, couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to live in a galaxy where she was the unquestioned ruler, where she bent the laws of space and time to her will. "Get the fleet ready," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We begin the final assault in 3 days." Mark nodded, his mind still spinning with the implications of her words. He had followed her through every battle, every conquest, and now he was on the verge of being a part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. It was no longer about a military mission or even the Empire. It was about the galaxy itself. 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The fleet was readied, the soldiers and officers primed for the final stage of their campaign. Mark moved through the ship, overseeing the last-minute details of the assault. His mind was heavy with the knowledge that this was it, the point of no return. There would be no turning back once they entered the throne world's orbit. If they succeeded, Lady Varela would reign supreme, and the galaxy would never be the same. If they failed, Mark didn't want to consider the consequences of failure. As they approached the throne world, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The planet loomed before them, a vast, shimmering orb surrounded by the protective defenses of the Empire. It was the heart of the galaxy, the symbol of imperial power. And it was now the target of Lady Varela's unrelenting ambition. The battle that ensued was unlike any Mark had ever witnessed. The fleet clashed with the Empire's defenders in a fierce, all-out war, ships engaging in a violent ballet of fire and destruction. Mark and his team were deployed on the surface, infiltrating the heart of the planet, fighting their way through the corridors of the Imperial Palace. Every step they took was a victory, but it came at a cost. The defenders fought with desperation, knowing that the loss of the throne world would mean the end of the Empire. But Lady Varela's forces were unstoppable, and one by one, the last pockets of resistance crumbled. Finally, As they reached the throne room itself, Mark saw it. Lady Varela standing at the heart of the galaxy, her eyes alight with triumph. She had done it. She had taken the throne world, had claimed the ultimate prize. And with it, she had claimed the galaxy. Mark stood at her side, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the end of one era and the beginning of another. There would be no more empire. There would be only Lady Varela's reign, and under her rule, the galaxy would never be the same. As she turned to him, her eyes burning with the promise of a new world, Mark knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, he would be a part of it. He had followed her this far. There was no going back now. The galaxy had changed forever, and so had he.